Good evening and welcome to the July edition of the Austin Software Cooperatives Meetup Group. We're going to be reviewing the book No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age by Jane McAlevey. So a little bit of overview of the book, and I think I suggested the book. Um, there's been a bunch of activity lately with unions this year, even through the pandemic, but it's really been getting big with the Amazon factory workers and um, the Starbucks unions. We've even had a couple unions here in Austin, or we've had one, a Starbucks union formed here in Austin. I thought it was interesting. There's some overlap. Locally, we have the National Cooperative Association. They were going to put on a class that was going to try to look at the overlap between unions and cooperatives. I think they had to reschedule it. Um, I find it to be interesting. Generally speaking, unions, they really, from the cooperative perspective, we look at unions and we kind of say they they are the labor side of the equation, but not the, I guess, the employer side, whereas the cooperative is going to be employer and labor rolled into one because everybody is a worker as an owner. So with this book, though, Jane McAlevey is looking at the overlap between, or really even contrasting, unions and social movements or social movement organizations, SMOs. Really, the argument is that they're really the same and that unions are just another social movement. She takes a strong position on unions in that, in her view, they are one of the most, if not the most powerful social movement because of the ability to strike and the ability to wield power when they are formed correctly. And we're going to get into that. So I know for me, I had never been in a union. I don't know too much about unions. So it was pretty good to read her different books and to get some history. This book, she first lays out what, obviously the format of the book, but it's really her PhD dissertation about how people organize. And then she goes through, kind of like how in a dissertation, I guess you have to review the work that's out there currently, and then do your addition to the to what's out there. So her main thesis is that there are three types of what I thought her main thesis was there are three types of, I guess you could call organizing, with three types of ways that people come together in order to have any form of solidarity. First one is advocacy. Second one is mobilizing, and the third one is organizing. And the main thrust of the book is that we've gotten away from organizing and we've done some mobilizing, and then we've done mostly advocacy. So we'll get a bit into that. Any questions so far? Okay.
No.
So that's, go ahead.
I said no. Sounds good. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So the this first statement, curiously, labor movement is conventionally ignored by scholars of social movements, right? So she talks about the overlap between really the original big unions of, I guess the names are the AFL and the CIO, so on and so forth, back in the 40s, 30s, and the civil rights movement, 50s, 60s, and how they both were able to wield power. She uses words like power and winning a lot. That I thought to be kind of different because they don't really see that kind of those types of words used in I don't know this type of literature. Kind of refreshing to because it's kind of talking about ways that are actually successful. Okay, so she's basically saying that in academia they ignore unions when they're talking about social movements, so on and so forth. Let's see here. So this statement, scholars assume that material gain is the primary concern of unions, missing that workplace fights are most importantly about one of the deepest of human emotional needs, dignity. So that's I guess when you're polling workers and asking them about what do they care about, one of the things that they care about for their job has something to do with their job having purpose, being valuable, and them having dignity when they're with their work. So that's a driver, and that kind of goes around your pure economic view of people go to work to make money only. So the argument here is that with some of the other, you could say, modalities of organizing, so advocacy and mobilizing, they kind of concentrate on the, you could say, either short-term gains or small gains or superficial gains, oftentimes of just a wage increase and even just an incremental wage increase at that. And so she wants to blend all of the different views, really political views of the workforce with what's going on at work. Yeah, so all the unions I work with were, by any definition, social movements characterized by progressive goals that reach well beyond the workplace, prefigurative decision making, and robust participation by workers, their families, and their communities. So she goes on to say we shouldn't really divide the workplace and the community. It's really a source of power for the individual. And she's linking it to the decline of unions. So the reason that progressives have experienced a 4-decade decline in the United States is because of a significant and long-term shift away from deep organizing and toward shallow mobilizing. Right. So I guess on both sides. So unions have declined because they ignore the social side or the community side, and community has declined because they started to ignore the the workplace, let's say, not just unions, but the workplace. All right. All right, so let's go. So structure, power analysis, and structure analysis. How many we got? Let's hurry up. So I'll go ahead and summarize a bit here with the power analysis and structure analysis. So it's essentially you really got two views. You've got a top-down view where you have the elites, and the elites have all the power. You could argue that that's the dominant view here, at least. And she's putting forth a view of the majority. The majority is really the group that has the power. Just they have to get organized. No, not easy, but if they do get organized, they're the ones with the power. Or it's another alternative view of power. Or that's the only way to obtain power is to organize. That's for the majority, what you call the majority. Right? So conversations about elite power can get very circular. They exercise it because they have it. They have it because they exercise it. They were born into it, have friends with it, et cetera, et cetera. Right? There's another book here that I'm probably going to read. The Poor People's Movement. She refers to this book a lot. They inserted ordinary people into the discussion about who can exercise power. So that's really what he's going to get into. So there's really two ways to look at the power structure in let's say, a business. You can try to center it around all of the, let's say, the executives or the elite in the business, or you can center it around the workers and what she calls the worker leaders or the organic leaders, right? So here's a critique. Liberals and most progressives don't do a full power structure analysis because, consciously or not, they accept the kind of elite theory of power that Mills popularized. They assume elites will always rule. At best, they debate how to replace a very naughty elite with a better elite, one that can work with or wants workers to have enough money to shop the CEOs out of each crisis they create, who will give them a raise that they will spend on consuming goods they probably don't need. All right. So I tend to think this is true. People tend to think that, maybe even myself, we tend to think that the power is going to be in the elite. So she's got her, we should change our thinking there. Search for these more friendly elites frames the imagination of liberals and progressives. An elite theory of power for well-intentioned liberals leads to the advocacy model. An elite theory of power for people further left than liberals, progressives leads to the mobilizing model, because progressives set more substantive goals that require display of potential power, or at least the threat of it. Right, but mobilizing is good, but it's not enough. People to the left of both liberals and progressives. So this is fun to think of people that are left of both liberals and progressives have a different theory of power. Different because it assumes that the very idea of who holds power is itself contestable, and that elites can be pushed from priestly high corporate rule. Though almost extinct nationally, there are still powerful unions operating at the local and regional level. These unions, democratic, open negotiations in which tens of thousands of workers unite to stop bad employers from doing horrible things, and then create enough power to pull up to the negotiations table as equals and determine something better, provide evidence that ordinary people can exercise both absolute power and creative power. Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead. Well, people who say they don't like unions will also say, at least in this country, it's illegal for children to work in factories. Or, I told the boss I wouldn't handle anything so toxic without protection. Or simply, thank God it's Friday. That is, they don't like unions, but they see child labor laws, workplace safety regulations, the 8-hour workday, and the weekend, and all benefits won by workers engaged in collective action through their unions as the reasonable and beneficial norm. Right. So things like that. I mean, even myself, even though I'm from the Northeast, I still don't really. I've never been part of a union. You know, it's something where I kind of have always wondered how useful are they, but I've always known or have learned that unions created these things. But the argument touched on in this book, but really gone over in her other books, is that that's all propaganda. There are bad unions. She talks about how the unions have become bad in quotes, and she gives examples. One of the big reasons why they became bad, or it's because they become ineffectual because they stopped organizing. And so they started really compromising to the point of just being really impotent. But there are some that were just corrupt too. And she talks about it in another book, but I don't know how much that about that. This looks like another book that I would like to review. I don't know how to say this name. Scopal. Documents in Diminished Democracy from Membership to Management in American Civic Life attempts to generate movements that movements are directed by professional, highly educated staff who rely on elite top-down theory of power that treats the masses as audiences of rather than active participants in their own liberation. So this is the advocacy model, right? Aiming to speak for and influence masses of citizens, droves of new national advocacy groups have set up shop with media amplifying debates among their professional spokespersons. So you have the National Abortion Rights Action League debates the National Rights to Life Action Committee, and the Concord Coalition takes on the American Association for Retired Persons, so on and so forth. Then ordinary Americans attend to such debates fitfully entertained or bemused. Then pollsters call it dinner time to glean snippets. Call it at dinner time to glean snippets of what everyone makes of it all, right? So she really doesn't like advocacy, and she really says that that is one of the main reasons why we basically got lazy, right? By the way, advocacy works really well when you have money. Like when you're the one with the most money, then it works really good. So advocacy works really good for corporations. Advocacy doesn't involve ordinary people in any real way. Lawyers, pollsters, researchers, and communications firms are engaged to wage the battle. Though effective for forcing car companies to install seatbelts, that is a hit on, I'm forgetting his name right now, guy that runs for office all the time, or banishing toys with components that infants might choke on this strategy severely limits serious challenges to elite power. What's the guy that always runs and they tried to blame him for losing the 2000 election? I'm forgetting his name.
Not
But he's
not Perot, are you thinking?
no, that's like 92 or something.
Oh my gosh, my timeline.
Yeah. No, he always comes out and people said in Florida he took too many votes. It wasn't true though, but that he took votes away from Gore, and so Bush won in Florida, and then therefore won. If I look up seatbelt law, he'll probably be the first one that comes up. Yeah, but he would be the ultimate example of an advocate, but I like that guy. I'm forgetting his name. That's gonna kill me if I don't get it. Yeah, now you said Ross Perot, and gonna kill me if I don't figure out this guy's name.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders.
No. No.
What are we saying then? Who are you thinking?
2000 election, Florida. I think he did the Green Party. I'm gonna leave this alone, otherwise I'm gonna get stuck. You look it up for me. Oh man. Recount. Surprise. I'm glad they kept his name out of the Wikipedia. Thank you. Of course they didn't. Of course they put him on there. Ralph Nader. He's a seatbelt guy.
All right.
Anyways. Yeah, you guys see this because of Ralph Nader.
He was in
Mobilizing.
2002 and the 90s. He's been around for a while.
He's, I mean, he's been around since the 60s. He's just, you know,
Yeah.
It's a good guy. It's a good documentary. Talk about that guy. Advocacy fails to use the only concrete advantage ordinary people have over elite, large numbers. In workplace strikes, at the ballot box, or in nonviolent civil disobedience, strategically deployed masses have long been the unique weapon of ordinary people. The 1% have a vast armory of material resources and political special forces, but the 99% have an army. So that's going to be a reoccurring theme. Mobilizing is a substantial improvement over advocacy because it brings large numbers of people to the fight. However, too often they are the same people, dedicated activists who show up over and over at every meeting and rally for all good causes, but without the full mass of their co-workers or community behind them. This is because professional staff directs, manipulates, and controls the mobilization. The staffers see themselves, not ordinary people, as the key agents of change. Right? So you can think of mobilizing as the campaign for the vote every 4 years. But you can think of mobilizing as choose electoral politics, for the example. The third approach, organizing, places the agency for success within a continually expanding base of ordinary people, a mass of people never previously involved who don't consider themselves activists at all. That's the point of organizing. In the organizing approach, specific injustice and outrage are the immediate motivation, but the primary goal is to transfer power from the elite to the majority, from the 1% to the 99%. Individual campaigns matter in themselves, but they are primarily a mechanism for bringing new people into the change process and keeping them involved. The organizing approach relies on mass negotiations to win rather than the closed door deal making typical of both advocacy and mobilizing. Right? So the long and the short of it, and I'm gonna keep these up while I'm talking about it, I guess. Organizing, in case we don't get to it, I'm gonna do it now. But organizing talks about having a structure. You're testing the power structure, so you're figuring out who is really who is it that's connected to other people. I when I was reading this, I immediately thought of like Malcolm Gladwell's book, The Tipping Point. Like there's connectors and there's evangelists and one other group I forget. But the connectors, the people who are connected to other people, they're not necessarily the ones who convince them of things, but she seems to think that they kind of are, but they are kind of the key. They are, but what she does more traditional leadership. So, who are the influencers? You could really change the word leader to influencer in this book, and I think it would read better. Those people who influence other people, they might not show up to any meetings or whatever. They're just the people that they talk at the watering station or in the cafeteria. You know, they're the ones who do the carpooling, that kind of thing. And they are the ones that, if you're going to try to, with her, what she's concerned with the unions, but if you're going to try to do a social movement, organizing in any way, I'm going to go ahead and add on, if you want to have a true democratic process, that's who needs to be reached. Those people need to be facilitated, let's say. That's what has moved me about how she writes. Like, she makes a strong argument for democracy, whereas if you were to take the elitist view, let's say from Sheldon Wolin, and where he talks about the elitist view, and it's interesting the overlap of this book and that book. So she talks about, there's another, I want to say, political philosopher named Tocqueville, who later on in this book influenced another guy named Arlinsky, who is the most influential person in unions at this point. And her argument is that she does a deep dive into him, and that he promoted mobilizing and advocacy. He did not promote, he even was hostile towards organizing. And he was referenced, like, she said that Hillary Clinton did her master's thesis on him. He was consulted by I want to say he influenced Obama in his campaign. I forget exactly how. But he's also required reading on the other side. So for the Tea Party, they read, his name is Saul Arlansky. So this guy is like organizing, mobilizing. She would say mobilizing. I guess master, really expert. So, she and that guy he likes Tocqueville, who is an elitist, who really, I don't want to just say pure elitist, but He says, because elitism is so strong, we need to, democracy has to bend around it, right? She puts forth an argument that there's another way. You can have a democratic institution, organization, so on and so forth, that does not succumb to elitism. Hard work, though, in order to do it. But yeah. So we have here the differences between advocacy, mobilizing, and organizing. You got the theory of power. You got the strategy. So, and this is where I kind of think of them as strategy. So advocacy, there's going to be litigation, heavy spending on polling, advertising, and other paid media. Advocacy kind of seems straightforward. Mobilizing, you got campaigns run by professional staff, so on and so forth. They prioritize frames and messaging over base power, right? And then organizing, you got recruitment and involvement of specific large numbers of people whose power is derived from their ability to withdraw labor or other cooperation from those who rely on them. So that's an interesting statement. So withdraw from cooperating is the source of power. Kind of interesting. So strike, so on and so forth. Right, so the people focus, advocacy focuses on no one. Mobilizing, grassroots activists. Organizing, the organic leaders. Any questions so far? This has been, I've been going for a pretty long time. All right. Yeah, we've talked about structure already. There's different power structures. You've seen the two views, elite and non-elite. So you have the history that goes up into the 90s of unions. And
I have a question about the section where it says this book is not about unions or organizing union and refers to social. Yeah. Did it talk anything about temporary organizations? I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is when you say that social movements and not organizing social movements versus union organizing, it seems like there's a point where organized social movement, if it lasts long enough, starts to focus more on keeping its structure and everything versus the social movement aspect. So, like, is there a point where you should say something should have a temporary, a limited lifespan, and then that should not exist anymore and you move on versus a longer running? Or how do you keep something?
She says that mobilizing is what that is. That is a temporary group, and we have plenty of that. She says we don't have organizing. So to mobilize, get everyone ready to go. You do your something, whatever it is, and you disappear. That happens all the time. Every 4 years for electoral politics. Activists in general don't organize, they mobilize. So when someone says that they are what she read earlier, they are some type of community rights, something type of activist or whatever, they're not organizing, they're mobilizing. So, I mean, the tools for mobilizing, Arlansky, I'm going to confuse him because there's somebody else's name that's very simple. Arlansky, I think his name is. He is the guy to read for mobilizing. and he's super influential. So he's more in the second chapter. Organizing is not done. There was one, depending on how hostile your environment is, you might have to have, I think she said something like 20 meetings a week. It was one place where she called the employer a diabolical, a diabolically anti-union, where people are getting beat up physically, things like that. In order to organize in a place like that, you're gonna need, it's really you're gonna basically have to be like a family. But yeah, let's skip to that though. Again, so let's see. History of new labor union. They basically went hardcore mobilizing and failed, and they started doing things that you wouldn't even believe, like basically put into the contract that the people can't strike. She gave examples of same industry, two different styles of unions. One of them did the organizing, one of them did the mobilizing, and they ended up creating the mobilizing union. They got worse benefits than people who didn't unionize at all. Like, they were really bad. So ridiculous. Or they got the same. It's just ridiculous. But the whole new labor union movement, which started in, I won't say started in, but a lot of activity in the 90s, right? So in the response to NAFTA, the North American Trade Agreement, she talks a lot about, they just got owned, basically. Like, they were very ineffectual. And she ties it back to mobilizing. So let's hurry on up over here. Second. All right. So she talks about the AFL, who I guess they weren't doing some of the organizing, and the CIO, they were historically doing the organizing. Now, one thing about this book that also jumped out at me, that is a hard problem to solve. They have problems of political identity and problems of class. And my ears always perk up when people have to address that contrast. And I think she does it pretty well. One of the examples is, sometimes unions have like a reputation of being racist. She kind of broke that down with this, you could say the name, so if I pronounce it correctly. Alinsky, that's his name, Saul Alinsky. Kind of broke it down to some of his methods. So Alinsky was hardcore anti, the word he used was dogma. He did not like dogma. He's anti-dogma. The only dogma was be anti-dogma. So don't care about, it's really community. So his thing was only the workplace. So really kind of, she proposes that he was really trying to he's pro-capitalism, kind of trying to save capitalism from socialists and communists, right? So he was kind of trying to find a happy medium, to put it in a nice way. Well, one of the I guess repercussions of that was, let's say in Chicago, you had, to use an example of the I think it was the AFL, that was one union, and they didn't care about civil rights at all. And the people would get together and they'd be like, hey, we don't really care about, if you don't want to hire any, black people, so what? The CIO, on the other hand, was organizing, this is her argument. So they were, whoever was a worker, they would reach out, and they were getting all of their concerns and trying to say, if these are your concerns, you better unionize in order for something to happen. And so, to use a quote in here, which you would say, when you'd walk around in Chicago and ask what union you were part of, so there are individual factory unions. That's how you unionize. But then there are more national ones. The national ones can give you a greater degree of power, because you can say to the employer, hey, we got this factory, but guess what? All your factories are going to go on strike if you don't let us do this, whatever, right? These types of things. So it was something to be said. So people would kind of have their local union. They would have the name, we're part of the Smithville union, or they could be part of the CIO, which is the national. So it was something to be said if someone just said that they were part of the national, because the workers don't care about that. They care about what they work for. So, but the quote was in here, she would go around, or people go around, ask, are you part of the union? They'd say they're part of the CIO, and it would be black people, which is odd, because you're supposed to be racist. CIO actually cared about civil rights. They were organizing, is her argument, right? So she talked about that, and her greater thesis is that political power is going to come from organizing. It's not going to come from mobilizing. And political power is going to come from addressing the 99%, which you saw before, what she said. Addressing, like if you were to go to every worker and say, what are the top 3 things that you want to change? But you definitely go to those organizational leaders. Like, so there's this meticulous way you're supposed to figure them out. Who is it that carpools with who or whatever? When you ask them, even though they're anti-union, you ask them, what 3 things would you like to change? Those 3 things, sometimes that's a community thing or political thing. It's not a work thing. Maybe it's a community thing that happens at work. It overlaps. And then it becomes, it's their union, it's their organization. So it's going to be a high priority. Simple as that. That's where the power comes from. That's her argument. That's generally the argument of the book, right? The way to, and then we're getting into the way you do it. She talks about it here. She gives lots of examples of the chapter, some of chapter 2, but chapter 3, 4, 5, they're all about examples. Chapter 6, chapter 5, this chapter, Smithfield Foods, is very moving to me, because it's all minority workers in the South, where in North Carolina, the least unionized state in the country, evidently. And there's examples of people getting, the employer beating people up, literally, and people testifying in front of Congress for that. People being arrested, like they basically had the police, on the payroll. Just say, hey, come down. There's going to be some illegal aliens. We didn't care about them before when they were working for us, but you know what? They're going to unionize. So just come on the property and come and arrest them. Arrest these people, right? So they were doing that kind of thing, just selective prosecution, that kind of stuff. But everything you can imagine, and they still, oh, and then as far as the court system was, took 10 years for the court system to do anything, all this stuff. But they eventually won through organizing. And when I say organizing, addressing the whole person, what she calls whole person organizing. So not saying, okay, we're just doing wages. It could be, you know, abortion rights. It could be medical, obviously. It could be racist stuff. It can be all of those things, political. When they're coming together and it overlaps, that's how you can get policy changed. There's a lot of talk about that in the book. You can get the elites and the corporations to change the way that they do things. So, see. So the CIO, that's kind of what I was just talking about. They were all about organizing. This guy Erlinsky he's totally the antagonist in this story. He basically wasn't a real organist. Her words. He never really organized. He did a biography on another guy named Lewis. I want to say he was the president of the AFL or CIO or something like that. He's one of the first. Lewis failed a lot, right? But then he would get these people who did organizing. She calls them the left organizers, and they were socialists and communists, and they would do a good job. And so what they would do is co-opt what they were doing, right? And then so Arlinsky looked at that and said, okay, I'm going to go ahead, and he repetitively got the people who did the organizing. He would just reap the fruits of their labor, basically. And then go around, and after he was done, tell them to go on their way, basically. Then he wrote a book that was influential, so on and so forth. And he totally wrote, she says a big, I don't know if it says it here, but he doesn't, a flaw in his writing is he has no concept of how to identify leaders in the group. So his leaders are the activists who have no influence inside of the worker population. And so that's really the long and short of that. So, all right, what killed unions? John Lewis's obsession with top-down power and his determination to reign on socialism. And remember, Arlinsky did the biography on this guy, right? So he wanted to kill things, and John Lewis was a union guy. Self-inflicted wounds of Stalinism and increasing divisions of American left. World War II's peace treaty between labor and capital. This instituted strike bans and decreasing opportunities for rank and file on the job problem solving. Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, straight-jacketed militants by banning solidarity strikes and forcing all unions to eventually all unionists to give an affidavit that they were not communists or affiliated with the left. Imagine that, like having to write up something that says you aren't affiliated, like not a socialist or whatever. And then you have McCarthyism. So you're a communist. So this is what really really hurt the unions. And that's what started the demise. And that was really a pushback from the corporation, so from the elite. We already talked about diminishing democracy, elitism, and we already talked about Saul Alinsky. This whole worker organizing, we talked about that. So that's basically it. Any questions?